track, Starliner's orbital maneuvering and attitude control thrusters, or OMACs, will fire up at 6:23 a.m. Central Time, and that will drop the spacecraft back out of orbit and begin the journey home.
Given that, Starliner should touch down for historic first landing at White Sands Space Harbor in New Mexico at 6:57. At the moment, though, NASA is, the team here in the mission control room is still got a lot of work to do to finish preparing for that launch.
And earlier in this shift, this team got a briefing on the weather at White Sands, which is looking promising today. It's definitely going to be chilly for the landing team heading out to meet Starliner. Temperatures are expected to drop down to around 22 or 23 degrees Fahrenheit. Right before sunrise, which is when Starliner's going to come down. And that's about and then their clouds are scattered, but the wind should be light. All in all, it'll look pretty good.
Unfortunately, though, we have chosen the longest night of the year to bring Starliner home. Happy winter solstice to everyone. It's going to be about 5:57 a.m. Mountain Time there in New Mexico, and the sun won't be up until 7:04. So we will have some cameras out there. You can see the landing team gathering here, what it looks like now. We'll show you as much as possible, but it will be dark for a little while.
So we have a lot coming up to show you here on NASA TV, but before we get too far into the landing operations, we do want to look back at Friday's launch of Starliner. Heading into a launch replay to take a look at that brilliant morning liftoff from Cape Canaveral.
Now 10 seconds into flight.
So there you see the United Launch Alliance Atlas V heading into the skies above Cape Canaveral.
Crowds there gathered to watch it as it lifted off on its journey.
Launch was, of course, timed to catch up precisely to the International Space Station's orbit.
One minute, 20 seconds into flight. Body rate responses on the vehicle look good. 1 minute, 30 seconds in, standing by for SRB burnout. And we have burnout on both solid rocket boosters. Atlas will hold on to the SRBs for an additional 48 seconds prior to jettison. RD-180 has gone back up to full thrust as expected. Engine response looks good. 1 minute, 50 seconds in. Atlas is now 17 miles in altitude, 11.5 miles downrange distance, traveling at 2,300 miles per hour. Now passing 2 minutes into flight. RD-180 engine operating parameters continue to look good at full thrust. And at 2 minutes, 11 seconds into flight, the Atlas rocket now weighs just 1.
So it really was a beautiful launch, and despite the fact that we're not going to be visiting the space station, we are still accomplishing a lot of Starliner's mission objectives.
That's right. First up, there was the launch itself, which confirmed the human rating for the Atlas V rocket. Then yesterday, Starliner was able to establish a connection with the space station while the station was about 500 kilometers away to test out sending commands from the ground through the space station. We also got a good report card on Starliner's state and attitude knowledge demonstration. The 3 SIGIs, or the Space Integrated GPS and Inertial Navigation System units, were able to provide really good navigation.
And we were also able to perform a good checkout of the system that would have allowed us to connect to the space station's docking adapter. And our anthropometric test article, Rosie the Rocketeer, is still strapped in the commander's seat and collecting data for us. We can't wait to see what she has to tell us when she gets back. Of course, there's been a lot of folks asking about Rosie, and she is still up there.
Rosie and Starliner should be landing in 1 hour and 5 minutes now. But a lot still has to happen before touchdown, so we're going to take a look at what's ahead in the mission profile.
3.5G acceleration limit. Engine responses will all look good. Three minutes, 55 seconds into flight. And Centaur's begun the boost phase chill down sequence.
And liftoff, the rise of Starliner and a new era in human spaceflight.
And Flight Director Richard Jones has given a go to commence the deorbit burn at the prescribed time. Coming up for setting the course for a landing by Starliner out in New Mexico, 1 hour and 2 minutes from now. Richard Jones pulled his team, and everyone is go.
That is pending one last bit of work that needs to be done on the propulsion officer's side, just making sure that manifold valve is open on the orbital maneuvering and attitude control system. That should happen about 10 minutes before the deorbit burn.
So the first step in getting there, of course, and getting back to New Mexico is the deorbit burn, and that is coming up at 6:23 Eastern Time. And that is going to be a 55-second burn firing using 4 of the orbital maneuvering and control engines on Starliner. To get ready for that, the team here on the ground is disconnecting Starliner's solar arrays and radiators. The spacecraft has enough power to get home now, and its sublimators will take over cooling. And as we promised, we have a number of teams around America taking part in today's landing operations. One of those teams is, of course, down at White Sands, New Mexico, at the landing site. And We're going out there now to Boeing's Josh Barrett and NASA's Dan Hewitt.
Landings, I imagine this setup looks quite a lot different. How do you expect this to go?
Yeah, it is vastly different. I mean, if you follow the International Space Station, we've been landing our astronauts in Kazakhstan in the Soyuz for several years now, and it's a lot of airborne assets. It's an extremely remote area, so there's no way to really drive on except in limited vehicles. One of the nice things about bringing landings like this back to America is we're much closer to cities, much better infrastructure, things like that. So it's great to see the convoy lined up. We've had a lot of exercises with the teams out here just over the last year or so as they've refined all of their procedures and everything to get ready for this landing. It's running like a well-oiled machine now. There's a bunch of different teams. Everybody's color-coded, so they all have their specific jobs, but it's great to see. Why don't we walk through some of the teams and what they're going to be doing today?
Yeah, so let's start over here, Tim. Why don't you follow me? So let's go up here. We'll kind of go line by line for the convoy. So we have our command vehicle up front here. That's where our recovery operations leader is and our recovery director. Those are the two guys who are really in charge of this whole operation, make sure the procedures go exactly as planned. Right behind them, we have our gold team. They have a very important job. They're the first to the vehicle, and they actually sniff for hydrazine. Now, the crew module uses hydrazine as a propellant, and if it does turn into a vapor, it can be very toxic and damaging to your health if you inhale it. So they will be full up in escape hazmat-style suits protected from that hydrazine. They use these special sensors to sniff for it and make sure the rest of the recovery convoy can come up to the vehicle. Now, going over here, the next line, we have our silver team. They're right behind gold team after gold team clears it. Their first job is to ground the vehicle. So the vehicle will be powered down, but there could be some residual electricity on it. And so before anyone can touch the vehicle, they're actually going to ground the vehicle and discharge any electricity from it. Then up next is blue team. That's us, or the blue vest. We're in charge of showing everyone what's going on. We've got situational awareness cameras, all of the microwave equipment to get back to our satellite uplink and make sure you guys can see this recovery effort. Next, we're going over here to the green team. So you see these big HVAC trailers right here. They're going to hook those up to the crew module to get some ground cooling on it. But their very first job, since it's so cold, it's 22 degrees, they're going to put an environmental enclosure on the crew module. It looks kind of like a big inflatable crew module sized bouncy house, but it's going to wrap around the vehicle, hug it, and we're going to get some warm air on the crew module and make sure the propellant lines don't freeze. And then after them is the red team. They're a lot of fun to watch. They are mostly Boeing fire rescue employees. Let's go up here and so I can show you the mobile access platform. So here, that platform will get backed up to the hatch on the crew module. That gives our teams access to the hatch. Right now, since there's no astronauts on board, we're just going to open up the hatch. One of our engineers, Selena Dopart, is going to go inside and run a couple of tests. But on a crew landing, that's where the crew will come out of the vehicle and be taken into this medical truck right here behind me for their initial post-landing medical checkups. And that's pretty much the convoy. So I'm going to go back here over with Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Great walkthrough. And as you can tell, he's really wanting to keep moving because it is pretty cold out here for the teams today. We are on the blue team, and we are going to be bringing you guys a couple of different views, hopefully, of the capsule today. There's a bunch of assets out here, one of which is just about 100 yards or so away from us. There's some tracker cameras on one of the main trucks that drive out here, the MDTV, the
MLCC. So we have our MDTV, that's mobile data and tracking vehicle. It's got 3 cameras on it. 2 of them are visible. One of them is infrared. And since it's so dark out, that's probably what we'll be relying on. And then next to it, we have our mobile command vehicle, the Mobile Landing Control Center. Those guys are looped in with Houston. And, that's really our link back to mission control. That is where the notification that the crew module has landed will come through. They will relay that to us on our field radios, and this whole thing's going to get moving.
Yeah, and so in addition to those assets, we'll have a couple more ground track cameras that we'll be looking to bring views of Starliner coming down for. And once again, we're going to have a WB-57 in the air, hopefully getting some views of Starliner as it's doing that entry interface, so plunging through the Earth's atmosphere, and then watching the parachutes come out, the heat shield jettison, a number of different things. So we are working to bring you all those views during the live coverage today. It is dark, so it's not going to be the prettiest picture, but we should have some great shots of Starliner coming down.
And I do want to reiterate the teams we have trained. Actually, it was a couple months ago. We were right here at this very landing site, training in pitch black conditions. We were reporting at 1 a.m. It was quite a bit warmer.
It was. It was.
You know, we're ready for this here. The team's ready for it. We've been on site since 1 a.m. They are locked in and ready to execute and ready to recover the first American orbital capsule to land on land.
Yeah, and there's going to be a couple of events on the way down, and I know Steve and Brandy are going to walk you guys through this quite a bit, but we're going to be looking for a couple of key things after that entry interface. So once they're through the atmosphere, that forward heat shield's going to come off and descend under parachutes. The drogue chutes are going to come out, and once those have done the initial steadying of the vehicle, the pilots will deploy and then bring out the main parachutes, which is going to do the vast bulk of the slowing. And then once we get down a little bit lower, I think a couple thousand feet off the ground still.
About 3,000, yeah.
About 3,000, that heat shield's going to pop off, and that's going to reveal the landing airbags, which will inflate and then allow Starliner to come down nice and soft on the ground. What's that final speed as we touch down again, Josh?
It's about 28 feet per second. I know you asked for miles an hour.
I think we're about 19 miles an hour.
But that's still a very soft landing, especially under those airbags. All the testing we've done, even on worst case scenarios with airbags out, coming down faster than we predicted, the loads on the crew were actually lower than we predicted in our analyses. So that's a good surprise to have.
Yeah, and a lot of the operations that we're going to see today will be very close to the exact same as when we have a crew on board. Some of the obvious things that will be different is we're not going to be pulling anybody out of the capsule today. We don't quite have all of the same medical personnel that would come. If you've ever seen a Soyuz landing, it's very common for the crew to come out, and then they always have a flight doctor with them, a flight surgeon. That's somebody who's assigned to a crew member before their flight, during flight, and after, just to provide that medical care. Nurses and a number of other personnel who are just kind of there on location for the crew. We know coming home from space after 6 months is a little jarring on the body, so we make sure and do the best we can to take care of these crew members once they're back on terra firma.
Yeah, you know, you watch a lot of those Russian landings, the crew members are assisted out, and that's actually why we tapped our fire rescue Boeing fire teams here. They're trained in enclosed area rescue. They're going to actually go in and extricate those crew members. And that's actually a word I learned recently. There's a difference between extrication and evacuation. Extrication is actually going in and pulling someone out of a vehicle. So that's what our firefighters will be doing. And I will say they're fantastic to watch. These guys work so well together, pulling that platform up to the crew module, opening up that hatch, and getting access to those crew members. I know everyone's curious about how Rosie's doing. We're not going to see her get pulled out of the vehicle today. She's actually pretty heavy. Anthropometric test devices are loaded down with a lot of weights and sensors and stuff, so it'll be a work to get her out. So we're going to leave her there for now, but she's all right.
And we do have some of those crew members that are going to be flying on Starliner. They are here with the teams observing all of the operations today. Among them, the crew flight test, so the first astronauts that are going to fly on Starliner, Chris Ferguson from Boeing, and then Nicole Mann and Mike Fink from NASA. We also have Sunny Williams on site with us, and she's going to be actually flying in this Starliner that's coming home today.
Yeah, so I'm sure this is a really special moment for her, seeing her spacecraft come down, but we've got a lot to get through. As you know, our senior vice president, Jim Chilton, said yesterday to the media, this stuff is not for the faint of heart. We have a lot to prove here, and landing, there's no point in sending people to space if you can't bring them home safely. So this is a very critical operation.
Yeah, well, we're going to bring you as much video as we possibly can on the way out. We're going to have some cameras rigged up, and we'll be on the ground with the capsule once it's down. And again, we'll be looking for some airborne and some ground tracker cameras to provide views, probably an infrared, because pitch black outside, of Starliner as it re-enters. And we're locked in and loaded here, and we're ready to go.
Yeah, so Steve and Brandy, we'll go back to you guys for updates from the flight control team. That deorbit burn should be coming up soon.
Thanks so much, Josh and Dan. We really appreciate y'all braving the cold to bring us those views, and we really are looking forward to what you're going to show us a little bit later.
And at this point, speaking of things that are coming up, Starliner is over the South Indian Ocean, heading below Australia before it comes over the Pacific, where it will perform the deorbit burn in about 16 minutes and 18 seconds. And at that point, after the deorbit burn, of course, the service module that is on the attached to the crew module will separate, and that will re-enter on its own. It will not. It's basically going to be disposed of, and the crew module is what will fly then through the heat of re-entry and on over the skies of New Mexico, where Dan and Josh are waiting to retrieve it.
And that will all get kicked off with a deorbit burn coming up in 15 minutes now. But while we wait for that to take place, we are going to talk now with Starliner engineer Jim May, who's been standing by to tell us a little bit more about the deorbit process and what we've already accomplished on this mission.
Responsibility on this program is making sure that the way we train is safe enough for us to fly. The astronauts are actually pretty easy to work with. So we make their flight more difficult. Nominally, we want a flight to go fully autonomous all the way to station with no problems. But in the event of an emergency, we have to train the crew to be able to react to those emergencies in a safely and timely manner. So we make their job as hard as possible by adding as many problems as we can during the training sessions. Chris Ferguson was my hiring manager. He was the first person I talked to on this program when I got started. And so making sure both your friend, your manager, your astronauts representing your country, making sure that they're safe is extremely important to me.
Welcome, Jim.
Morning.
Jim, one of the questions we've been asked is whether the mission elapsed time problem that crept into the orbital insertion burn could cause an issue today during this phase, during this deorbit landing phase. Tell us how the software has been tested in the past 2 days to confirm that this problem is not going to show itself again.
Sure. So the mission elapsed time has been updated. The flight control team, Richard Jones, they recognized that. We're able to command the vehicle to change its mission elapsed time, which then goes into all of the flight management computers. So all the computers are now in agreement with what the mission elapsed time should be, and all of the continuing automated flight features that use that time are going to follow it and have been successfully following it ever since.
That's great news. So I know that the software is really able to do a lot for Starliner and handles a lot of the mission events, but how does that interact with the team here in Mission Control?
The team in Mission Control is watching what the flight control system is going to tell the vehicle what to do. So there are parts of the spacecraft inside of the flight software that say, hey, this is where the vehicle needs to point, and this is where the vehicle is going to need to go to in the future in order to do things like deorbit or rendezvous and things of that nature. So the flight control team on the ground is looking at that data and maybe making updates to it should they be wanting to make any changes to the flight plan in the future. But the ground control team always knows where the vehicle is going to be pointed, where it's pointed now, and everything that it wants to do to remain on the flight plan as designed.
And Jim, you've been working this program for a while. Tell me about some of the things. How are you feeling with the way? I mean, just to see that Starliner's up in space and now it's getting ready to come home. What are some of the things going through your mind now?
You know, this next phase of flight is a very critical one. It's one that we actually train a lot of the crew for most extensively, and so I'm looking forward to seeing the spacecraft fly the automated reentry plan just as we designed. Because that's all we care about. The most thing we care about the most is the safety of the crew. So seeing that the automated flight plan can go as expected is great, because we are also training the flight crews to be able to take over should there ever be any issues if they need to.
And Jim, when you look at some of the other aspects of this flight, the brilliant launch yesterday, and how tough was it for the team to execute some of those demonstrations that were performed? Was that a problem at all, or did Spacecraft really perform the way it was supposed to?
Once we have the spacecraft in a stable orbit, we've been able to perform the demos just like we planned, just at a slightly different orbit. So being able to test the propulsion systems, looking at the vision, the navigation system, being able to check out the star tracker, which is telling the vehicle where it is relative to the stars, relative to the sun. All of those things have been working just as planned, and the flight control team has been able to follow the flight plan for each of the demos exactly as we wanted to do it. So all the systems have been working nominally since then, and doing everything we need to do to check out the vehicle for crewed flight.
And I guess coming up will be another big demonstration with Starliner making its way back to Earth.
Exactly.
Can you walk us through some of the events that we'll be seeing over the course of the deorbit and landing?
Sure. So we're going to do a deorbit burn, which is going to take the Starliner at the altitude that it's at and lower the future altitude so it actually comes into the atmosphere. Where it comes into the atmosphere is a place called entry interface. Once the spacecraft enters the atmosphere, it is then going to start controlling itself by doing turns and firing its thrusters to keep the spacecraft coming down towards our preferred landing zone at White Sands. And so while the spacecraft is maneuvering, it can change how far left or right it's going to go. It can change how far or how close it's going to come down on the ground. And all of those things that are going to be done by the automated flight system. Once we have come through the atmosphere and slowed ourselves down enough, we're actually going to fire some drogue parachutes to slow the vehicle down. From there, we'll pop out the heat shield, pull out the airbags, and then we'll pull out the main parachutes to come down on a nice soft landing in White Sands.
And Jim, we had the early difficulty with the mission elapsed timer, and it's really all the teams have been working very hard since then, and of course, none of the past couple of days have been the teams have been working the whole time. Give us a little bit more insight. We touched on this earlier, but give us a little bit more insight into what that evaluation process has been, and y'all are dealing with a lower orbit than expected, but it is still something that is manageable. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. So Starliner is designed to fly anywhere in low Earth orbit. So the fact that we're at a slightly lower than planned orbit does not mean the vehicle can't perform like a spacecraft that can fly automated and on its own. So the processes we've been going through work the exact same way as if we were at a slightly higher orbit. It's just that we have we go around the Earth a little bit faster because our altitude is a little bit lower. But the teams have been able to operate the spacecraft using the exact same commanding, the exact same plan for the order of things that they're going to do than they would have done for the normal mission profile.
And I guess it will have just a little bit shorter journey. Normally it takes about, 45 minutes for Starliner to get down after its deorbit burn, but it's a little closer to 30 this time?
That's correct. That just has to do with how long it takes from the deorbit burn for the altitude to slowly come down, because our trajectory is no longer a circular trajectory around the Earth. It's going to be coming down in a lower path.
And we can see from our monitors here in Mission Control that Starliner is going through the orientation steps ahead of this deorbit burn that's coming up in just a few minutes. Jim, you're watching this. You're watching this closely. What are you thinking so far?
Everything's looking good right now. We've got the vehicle pointed where we need to do the deorbit burn. It looks like the flight control team is all happy. GNC, my background from school, I'm happy now because that's the type of thing that I really studied for. So we're looking good for the deorbit burn.
We're hearing here in Mission Control that the Starliner is on its way into burn attitude now. So that'll be getting us in place for the deorbit burn coming up just 7 minutes and 30 seconds from now.
And at this point, Starliner is crossing below Australia on its way over the Pacific. It is going to fly back on what is called an ascending node, which basically means it's coming up from south to north on this pass, going over Baja California and then over New Mexico on its way to White Sands. part of the team here, of course, that's been working throughout this mission, the flight directors, they each have their own teams, and the on-orbit team is led by Bob Dempsey. Bob Dempsey is an astronomer at first and is a veteran flight controller for Space Station and now for Starliner. Here's a look at Bob Dempsey.
That NASA was doing, space shuttle, probes around Jupiter, stuff like that. But when I came here and became a flight director, I realized it's not the technology, it's the people. My call sign, and therefore my team name, is Galileo Flight. That's an homage to the fact that I'm by training an astronomer, so I had that heritage coming in here, always interested in exploring. When the chief of the flight director's office called me, I was very surprised. Of course, I'd applied and hoped to be selected, but I really thought the odds were pretty limited because it's a small contingent of people. In fact, there's been less flight directors than astronauts in the history of NASA.
And as we mentioned, Richard Jones is back on console today to bring us in for a landing. Here's a look at what he had to say.
The role of the flight director, to put it simply, the flight director makes decisions. I make decisions. And as the mission is continuing, whatever timeline that we're following, whether it's pre-launch, ascent, on orbit, docked, during entry, a lot of questions come up in terms of how we want to proceed, because sometimes the script isn't always written for whatever we're doing at the time. We may suffer a failure. We may have to react to different priorities, whatever is changing. And so the flight director's role is to take all of that information in, and all of the systems information, the human element, if astronauts are in that vehicle, and make a decision on how to proceed or not to proceed. Sometimes the answer is not to go forward with something. So it's really just about decision making.
The other members of our STAR team of flight directors are Ed Van Cise, who was covering the what we call the third shift, and also Mike Lammers, who is sitting with Richard Jones today. He's been kind of the weather flight director for both launch and landing. Also, at the flight control console, you've got a couple of Capcoms on shift with us. We have Tracy Caldwell Dyson and Josh Cassida. Josh is actually scheduled to take his own flight on this Starliner that is currently in space now. He'll be on the second crewed flight of Starliner. Each of those teams spent about 9 hours in mission control at a time, with 1 hour on either end of the shift devoted to handover for the oncoming team. Together, these teams have seen Starliner safely through the mission thus far, put it in the best configuration for a successful landing, coming up in just 37 minutes now.
37 minutes down to New Mexico. The GNC position here reports that Starliner is in the correct attitude for its deorbit burn that is coming up. At this point, the service module and the crew module are both still attached to each other. It will be the service module's OMAC engines, 4 of them, the orbital maneuvering and control engines, that will power the deorbit burn. They are each 1,500-pound class thrusters, meaning that this 55-second burn will be about 6,000 pounds of thrust. That will slow Starliner from its current orbital velocity and let it fall into the atmosphere, and ultimately fly to New Mexico and touch down in White Sands.
Those OMACs are just about done with their duty for this mission, but they will also help us move the service module away from the crew module once the two of them disconnect after the deorbit burn. That burn's coming up in just a little over 2 minutes now. Everything still looking good here in the room. Everyone quiet and working through their last steps to get ready for it.
And after the deorbit burn, we'll be looking at a what is called entry interface, which is basically the point at which the hottest part of atmospheric reentry begins. This is the point when Starliner's heat shield will face its biggest test. It's going to get up to 3,000 degrees, and the plasma will form around the spacecraft. The heat shield is going to provide a barrier to that. It's an ablative heat shield of Boeing's design, and that's going to protect Starliner and all of its systems.
That's a lot to protect it from. 3,000 degrees is almost 1,000 degrees hotter than lava. So it's got quite a job ahead of it. And all that takes place about 75 miles above Earth.
So we are about 1:13 away from the deorbit burn here. Watching, this will be Starliner's 33rd orbit of the Earth that this return is happening on.
"30 seconds to go now until the deorbit burn begins. Again, it'll last about 55 seconds in all.
Ten seconds to deorbit burn. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Deorbit burn in progress. Good control reported. 4 OMAC thrusters firing for about 55 seconds to slow Starliner down to begin its return to Earth.
All looking good thus far. "40 seconds in, about 15 more to go.
Starliner, we can see, is maintaining its attitude. OMAC thrusters are firing. Smaller RCS thrusters are keeping the spacecraft in its position. Good burn reported. Engines cut off. We are on our way to White Sands, Richard Jones tells his team.
Starliner's ready to come home now. Next up, as we were just talking about, is the entry interface. That'll be coming up in about 16 minutes. But before that, Starliner does want to get rid of the service module so that the crew module can make its way home on its own. That clears the way for that heat shield and eventually the parachutes that will lower Starliner down slowly to Earth.
So Starliner is on a path coming home now. Its speed is dropping, and we will soon be jettisoning the service module as noted, but we are definitely on the way home to White Sands.
Moving into attitude to get rid of the service module now.
And flight controllers report that we are in the right attitude and service module has jettisoned. Crew module is flying on its own. Service module will be disposed of while it re-enters over the Pacific. While the crew module continues on a flight path to White Sands, New Mexico, where our Boeing and NASA teams are waiting to recover.
Right now it's up to the reaction control system on the crew module to flip the crew module back around, get its heat shield pointing into what will soon become a very hot spot. Make sure it's ready for re-entry.
At Starliner Mission Control in Houston, we continue to monitor the progress of Starliner as it flies back to White Sands, New Mexico. All systems are looking just like they're supposed to. Everything is looking good. The crew module is positioning itself for the re-entry. We have entry interface coming up in 13 minutes, 40 seconds. And another Starliner engineer joining us this morning is Tori Wills-Pedrati. You might remember from our launch coverage a couple days ago. Tori is an expert on the heat shield of Starliner and many of the other systems. Tori, what are you thinking? What are you thinking right now as we proceed towards this reentry with Starliner in a good attitude and heading over the Pacific on the way to White Sands?
So thanks, Steve. This is a really exciting morning, right, for Starliner to be able to show not only a good SM separation, but also a good attitude coming down into White Sands. So this is just a really good place to be in for the vehicle, and it's going to be upcoming here soon that we're going to get to test the heat shield. We have tested that heat shield here in the atmosphere at Ames with NASA a couple different times in an arc jet. Which is really cool and as close as we can get to those really hot atmospheric temperatures on Earth, but there's nothing like a flight test to prove the safety and reliability of something as important as the heat shield.
And now that we are, let's see, 11 and a half minutes away from beginning to experience entry interface, it's really coming down to the crunch time.
Yeah, it is. And again, this is just really exciting, and it's going to be a really good test of that heat shield. Now, a good thing to remember about the heat shield is that it's a game of threes. So the heat shield is going to see about 3,000 degrees at entry interface, and it's going to convert that heat to about 300 degrees on the interior of that inner mold line with about 3 inches of ablator. So it's a really great technology that Boeing has developed, the Boeing lightweight ablator that we have on the vehicle. So it's really exciting to be able to test it here. And also, we have seen some successful parts of this test already. During pad abort, we saw a very successful base heat shield jettison, which happens at about 3,000 feet. So some parts of this we've already seen, but right now we're just really looking to see how the ablator performs during this uncrewed flight test.
Hopefully it'll all go just as expected. Assuming that we're back, it does go expected we're back next time with crew on board, what would they be feeling at this point?
So at this point, from a thermal perspective, they would not be feeling anything different than what they would feel during the rest of the trip. The interior of the vehicle is around 70 to 75 degrees and is very comfortable for the crew. It's all in the exterior of the vehicle that you would see those really high heat waves, those heat loads. They would be seeing a very cool light show outside of their window right now as some of that thermal effects start to take place and you start to see the aero heating sphere occur around the vehicle.
And Tori, the heat shield for Starliner, of course you have the base heat shield, which is the main thing that we're talking about, but the whole vehicle has a thermal protection, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. So the quilted looking blanket that is on the top of Starliner that has that gray color is actually a type of thermal protection system, a TPS. So that is a thermal blanket made out of a bunch of different layers and thicknesses of a quilted material that is actually sewn together and then epoxied onto the outside of Starliner. And while that part of the vehicle will not see the high heat that the base heat shield will, that gray color and the density of that TPS still protects the vehicle, not only from the high heat of reentry, but also from the really cold temperatures when we're on orbit. So both of those are important when we think about thermal protection systems.
Outstanding point, Tori. At Starliner Mission Control, we are 8 minutes 50 seconds away from entry interface, which is the point at which Starliner starts to encounter the hottest parts of re-entry. Starliner is in its current is in the proper attitude currently. Its base heat shield pointed in its direction of travel. Tori, entry interface. It's something you've been looking at for a long time, and now we're coming up to it.
Yes, so when we did analysis on the heat shield and when we were designing and, testing it, entry interface is really when we would start caring about the thermal loads the heat shield would see. Before that, the heat shield is protected by the SM because we don't want it to be affected by any micrometeor debris or anything like that. So having the SM cover the heat shield is really important until we're ready to use it, because we want it to be at the exact thickness that we analyze to, so it's able to perform its job to the best of its ability.
Can you give us an idea of how precisely that analysis goes?
Yes, so each area of the heat shield is actually lofted. So if you look at the heat shield as, as a layer of like a grid, each point on that grid is at a different thickness to be able to cover all of the heating that we would see during multiple different re-entry trajectories, but also able to have it as thin as possible to be as lightweight as possible. So we really worked to make the heat shield the most efficient it could be, while also being as the lightweight as it could be, so that we're able to carry more cargo or more crew to station when we eventually go there.
Well, how long after entry interface would you say that the heat shield has kind of done its job? When will you sigh with relief?
So when we release the drogue parachutes, at that point the heat shield has taken the brunt of the heat forces, and by the time that we're ready to release those drogues, the heat shield has done almost all of its work. We performed analysis all the way up until the heat shield will actually drop at about 3,000 feet, but once we start releasing those parachutes, I'm going to have a big old sigh of relief. Now, when the vehicle comes back, and if we get any shots of that, the ablator is going to look black. It's going to be charred. It's going to have that sort of crusty looking appearance. And that is exactly what we expect, because how an ablator works is it transfers heat into gas, and by doing that it chars the material. So when the material is when it's new and when it hasn't seen any heat yet, it's white. But if we see it's black as it's coming back, that means that it actually worked and we've transferred that heat into gas.
And Tori, you're of course an expert on another Starliner system, the interior camera system. We of course have had a lot of interest on that, but as we understand it, we think we'll be able to have those interior views of Rosie in the commander's seat throughout from this mission.
Yes, that's correct, Steve. So the interior system for the camera, for OFT, it's recorded, it was supposed to record the entire flight. We definitely got all of the uphill. And then when we got into our orbit and we were stationary, we did have to do some powering down. So the camera system was powered down for a short amount of time, but then it came back on and we powered it back on as we started to do re-entry. So we'll be able to see Rosie and Snoopy, not only on the uphill ride and as we orbit a little bit, but also during this re-entry. So that's going to be really valuable engineering data for the teams to be able to see how Rosie is affected, as well as using her sensor data. But also it's going to be great to be able to show the American public what sort of ride they expect. We have 4 cameras in the vehicle, and one of those is actually pointed out the window, so you're going to see some really cool hopefully views of the Earth, and then you know, that heat that we expect around the heat shield during re-entry. So excited to get that off the vehicle when it gets home.
It's an exciting time. We did have a Starliner performance deorbit burn at 6:23 a.m. Central today, putting it on its journey back towards a landing in New Mexico, just 20 minutes away from now. We'll be coming up on that entry interface that we've been talking about in about 4.5 minutes, but we'll keep talking with Tori for a little longer.
So Tori, speaking of the camera system, it's of course made for the crew that's going to be flying this same vehicle after PCM, and of course before that there'll be the crewed flight test mission with Boeing astronaut Chris Ferguson and NASA astronauts Nicole Mann and Mike Fink. What are some of the models that you followed before for really what the crew wants to show, what's important to them to be seen?
So we designed this camera system extensively working with Chris Ferguson and making sure that he was comfortable with the views and also with how close and up close and personal we would be inside the crew cabin. So that sort of data that we're going to be able to get from 4 different camera views on the interior of the Starliner is going to be really valuable to training astronauts in how to use our systems down the road, and also to sharing the Starliner story with the public. Now for CFT, we're going to have some enhanced capability. We're going to be able to show docking live through the ISS. You'll be able to see the hatch opening ceremony and the crew greeting the ISS crew for CFT. So that sort of moments of being able to capture is not only important for the crew, to be able to understand how the systems work and to be able to train others past them, but also to just be able to share the story and show everyone, that we've had a successful docking.
Thank you, Tori. We are less than 3 minutes away from Starliner's entry interface with the atmosphere, 2 minutes 43 seconds. This puts us at 18 minutes 31 seconds from landing at White Sands, New Mexico.
We're already beginning to see the altitude drop for Starliner really steadily, about 95 miles above the Earth right now, and quickly falling.
Flight Director Richard Jones and his team of mission controllers are monitoring every moment of this. Currently, Starliner reports 147,000 feet. Moving under the Mach 25 orbital velocity, currently 24.6 Mach. And at Starliner Mission Control in Houston, we are 40 seconds. We are 40 seconds away from entry interface, now 34 seconds. Starliner continues in the proper attitude. Altitude 127,000 feet. 127,000 meters. Apologies. 126,000 meters.
And we are right on top of that entry interface. This is when Starliner would be seeing those 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. Should be just about 75 miles above the Earth at this point. We did want to make sure, as people are tuning in, that they are aware that following Starliner's touchdown, we will be hosting a post-landing news conference here on NASA TV at 9 a.m. Central Time. That's going to feature Jim Bridenstine, the NASA administrator, Jim Tilton from Boeing, and Steve Stitch from our commercial crew program.
And Starliner is a minute into entry interface into that phase of maximum heating during this re-entry back over the Pacific. Starliner is flying as a crew module alone. The service module has been jettisoned and disposed of. Altitude 104,000 meters.
The entire team here in the room is quietly watching, making sure all the systems continue to look good. We've also got a number of VIPs in the viewing room as well. We've got NASA's Administrator Jim Bridenstine, as well as Boeing's Jim Chilton, and the Boeing Defense and Space CEO Leanne Carrot as well.
And we are seeing now on the landing track here in Mission Control as Starliner moves over the Pacific. Starliner is 13 minutes 27 seconds from landing at White Sands Space Harbor, New Mexico. Starliner is entering the expected blackout region when the plasma forms over the spacecraft and the antennas cannot adequately communicate with the overhead satellites.
Currently 51 miles above the Earth, still heading in, making its way through that entry interface, about 3 minutes into it at this point. The next milestone we'll be looking for is the forward heat shield jettison. That should be coming up in less than 10 minutes now.
Controllers report good attitude, good roll to the position it needs to be in. Starliner at 75,000 meters. Starliner moving through Earth's atmosphere, going through the entry phase. 11 minutes, 30 seconds to landing at White Sands, where a team of specialists are waiting to recover the vehicle. This vehicle will be reused after this mission. It'll be taken to the Starliner factory in Florida and refurbished, and then flown on the first operational It'll be flown, slated for the first operational mission. Five minutes into entry interface, we are now 10 minutes, 34 seconds before landing at White Sands, New Mexico. Starliner's controllers report the spacecraft is in good attitude.
About 5 minutes away from when we expect that forward heat shield jettison. The first of the heat shields that will be jettisoned. In the meantime, we've got 10 minutes until landing, and the Starliner will be heading in the next few minutes over the Baja Peninsula, part of Mexico, and then into New Mexico in the White Sands Space Harbor.
And we have confirmation that the on-site vehicle at White Sands, the tracking vehicle, is tracking Starliner right now. Systems are looking good. Nine minutes, 30 seconds to landing. And FIDO reports that Starliner is on track, continuing its descent to White Sands, New Mexico, altitude 51,000 meters.
That's about 32 miles above Mexico at the moment. Getting our first views.
We are getting our first views from the NASA WB-57. We see their Starliner continuing its plunge through the atmosphere. We are 8 minutes and 8 seconds from landing. That image is infrared because of it being dark, of course, over the skies of New Mexico right now.
Still about 28 miles above the Earth as it continues making its way, just about crossing over the New Mexico border now. This video again coming from one of NASA's WB-57 planes using infrared camera.
All systems are reported doing well. Spacecraft is doing well. Altitude 41,000 meters.
7.5 minutes till landing, and just a couple minutes now until we should hear about the forward heat shield jettison. Great view here. Can't see much since it's dark, but it's good to know that Starliner is on its way home, and this is actually a little better than I was hoping, considering that it's in the middle of the night in New Mexico.
Very good to see this. Very good to see this. Everything is looking, that image is exactly what we expect. The thermal protection system on Starliner, of course, protecting the spacecraft from the heat of entry. Slowing speed down, now Mach 3.5. Of course, orbital velocity is Mach 25, so that gives you an idea of the velocity change.
Now 17 miles above New Mexico.
Six minutes to landing at White Sands, New Mexico. Starliner remains in its proper attitude, proper course. Speed Mach 1.1, 19,000 meters. Landing recovery team has visual on Starliner as it comes down. 10,000 feet.
It's about 6.2 miles still above New Mexico, but we did just
Forward
get
heat shield deploy.
confirmation of that forward heat shield deploy. Everything,
Drogues out.
things will happen fast now. The drogues will start stabilizing the Starliner and slowing it down before the main heat shields deploy after it. Main parachutes, rather, not heat shield.
Vehicle is slowing rapidly. Mach 0.2. And landing site reports the sonic booms as Starliner came over. And we can see on that image the two pilot chutes, the two drogue chutes. Three minutes, 30 seconds from landing. Mains deployed. And we see three main chutes. Three main chutes. Billowing up, we have three main chutes. We see the red, white, and blue as Starliner descends. 2 minutes, 53 seconds from touchdown. And the rotation handle has deployed. That will level Starliner as it descends. Base heat shield has jettisoned. That is the base heat shield falling away as planned. Airbags are inflating.
And that is the last of the milestones. So now all that's left is for Starliner to float down to the surface of the desert in New Mexico. Everything continuing to look good on this camera that we're getting from the WB-57 cameras, infrared cameras, giving us as good a view as we could expect at nighttime.
2 minutes, 12 seconds to landing. Starliner descending under three good main chutes. All six airbags are confirmed to have deployed, and they are fully inflated as Starliner descends to the desert down in White Sands.
Just about 800 meters left to go. It's less than half a mile.
Great imagery there of it descending. Less than 1 minute to landing, less than 1 minute to touchdown at White Sands, New Mexico. Starliner floating smoothly and softly under three main parachutes.
Just 300 meters left to go. That's 984 feet. Very close now.
20 seconds. 20 seconds to landing the first Starliner flight test vehicle. And Starliner touches down in the desert in New Mexico. An historic landing in White Sands, New Mexico concludes the first flight test of Boeing's Starliner spacecraft, the first time an American-made, human-rated capsule has landed on land.
That took place right at 6:58 a.m. Central Time, 2 days, 1 hour, and 21 minutes into Starliner's mission. Congratulations, Starliner.
Congratulations, indeed. Flawless flight back to Earth. Good landing this morning. Now the spotlight's going to shift a little bit to the landing recovery team waiting for it out there in New Mexico. They have to wait for clearance before they start heading over to the vehicle, but Starliner has touched down at White Sands successfully this morning. Main chutes are jettisoned.
That'll keep those chutes from pulling Starliner away as the landing recovery team is looking to make their way toward it. Once again, today's landing time was 6:58 a.m. Central Time or 5:58 a.m. Mountain Time local for Starliner. That again was 2 days, 1 hour, and 21 minutes into Starliner's historic orbital flight test.
And Starliner systems have switched to ground mode. Right now, that means the vehicle is taking the steps it needs. Mission Control remains in command of the vehicle. We will soon see the landing recovery team head out. And we're going now to Boeing's Josh Barrett out with the landing recovery team. Josh, it was a beautiful landing from here. I can only imagine how it is from there.
Live, Josh. Steve, it was a beautiful landing from here. We had a spotlight on the ground. We could actually see some of those ordnance fires up in the upper atmosphere when that forward heat shield was deploying. We could see the strobing light on the vehicle all the way down, and then when those parachutes deployed in the spotlight, it looked almost ghostly as it drifted down and touched down at 5:58 here. As you can see, we are moving in the convoy right now. We've got our H2, which is actually the connection that I'm talking to you guys back from right now, right in front of us. Our recovery operations leader, we call him Roll. He's in contact with the recovery operations coordinator. That's rock and roll for you. They are leading us out to the crew module. I can actually see it strobing out in the distance on the horizon. We have the GPS coordinates locked in. That strobe is still going on, so we're just going to follow that all the way into the crew module. And then once again, Gold Team will be the first to approach the vehicle. We heard the radio call that there's no hazardous conditions for the LRT. That's the landing and recovery team. But we still want to make sure that everything is safe before the teams get around the vehicle. So again, Gold Team is going to approach the vehicle, sniff out, make sure there's no residual hydrazine on the outside or there's no propellant leaks. Silver Team is going to go in and discharge the vehicle, and then Green Team is going to go in and start getting that environmental closure around the vehicle and get some ground heating to it because it's so cold. We want to make sure those propellant lines don't freeze. And then the red team moves in, gets access to the hatch, and then I think we'll probably wrap up this broadcast right around hatch closer. When there's crew members in there, obviously we'll stick around until everybody's out, but you know, today getting that hatch open and getting access to the interior is really the final big milestone for the landing and recovery team. You know, over to our east, we're starting to see the sun come up, so hopefully we'll have a little better lighting for you as we get into these operations, but you know, just a great feeling out here, hearing crew module touchdown on the radios just gave everyone here chills. There was a lot of cheers. Very happy team, and they're ready to rock. So back to you guys, Steve.
Thank you, Josh. So great to hear that. Richard Jones, flight director here at Mission Control, said that looks like it's going to be a smooth ride for CFT, judging by how softly and smoothly this OFT vehicle, this orbital flight test vehicle, came down this morning.
I'm sure the astronauts on their way to see it will get their assessments as well. Hopefully, be just as enthusiastic as that. I know they're excited to be there. Just a reminder, we've got a lot of work left for this team here in the room, but in just a little while we will be going to a post-landing news conference. That's going to be at 9 a.m. Central Time. So we've still got a couple of hours to follow along with Starliner activities here on the ground. But we will be hearing from Jim Bridenstine, Jim Chilton, and Steve Stitch at that time. Again, 9 a.m. Central.
And also the landing team there in New Mexico, there in White Sands, reports that, quote, "We hit the bullseye." So Starliner came down exactly where it was supposed to, right at White Sands, right where it needed to be. It was a spectacular entry this morning, and of course, remarkable images coming down as it. We're also getting our first look through the darkness at the Starliner capsule as it sits on the desert floor there in White Sands. This picture is from our landing recovery team as they move out towards the spacecraft. And you heard a little bit earlier from two of our Starliner engineers, Jim May and Tori Wills-Pedrati. They are standing by in the studio. Jim and Tori, it looked great from here. New Mexico reports it looked good. I can only imagine the feelings that y'all have experienced this morning.
Thanks, Steve. It has been an absolutely amazing morning. Really trying just to keep it together and not cry on live TV. But it is a fulfillment of 7.5 years of work to see this happen so successfully and make it look so easy. So this is just an absolutely great morning for me.
That's, I feel the same way. We've been training. It's not just us as engineers, but we've put a lot of work into training all of the flight crew and the mission controllers as well. So being able to get them ready for this flight and have them control the vehicle, command the vehicle to come down safely in the desert means good things looking forward for our future crewed missions as well.
Yeah, and Jim, it's such a great synergy between not only the technical systems, right, but also our people systems. We had such great people on console, we've had such great people out in the desert, and then we also have a really great technical vehicle. So like seeing all of these things happen together is because of the team that really made this happen. So it's just excellent to see.
Exactly, the team effort's great.
And for those just joining us, about 8 minutes ago, Starliner touched down on the sands of White Sands, New Mexico at 6:58 a.m. Central Time, 5:58 a.m. local Mountain Time out at White Sands.
Seeing a replay here of that touchdown. Again, everything happened right on time. All the milestones, the heat shield jettisons, the parachutes, deployment, the airbags filling up, everything giving good indications for all of the landing system elements.
A lot of activities, of course, took place. The spacecraft in control of them during that final descent. Tori and Jim, a lot of things for the spacecraft to do, but it went really, really well. It looked like. From your technical knowledge, what do you think?
So I just have to say that heat shield jettison was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. It looked really good from this end. I'm really excited to see some of the more up close images that I'm sure we're going to get from the ground team, and also be able to really dig into the data from the vehicle now that it's back here on Earth. I don't think we could have had a better flight.
Yeah, and the vehicle, we simulate this reentry, especially with the actual flight crews and the mission controllers for the uncrewed flight. But seeing the vehicle nail the bullseye, all of the separation and ordnance events happening exactly when they plan to, means that we've done a really good job of modeling and planning for our flight with our simulations, the way that we train everybody. So seeing that work just as we planned means that we've got a good background moving forward into our future flights.
And just a reminder that here we are about 10 minutes after landing. And the Starliner landing recovery team is making their way out to the spacecraft. We will hear more from Josh Barrett and NASA's Dan Hewitt as they get closer to the spacecraft, coming a little bit later. We are talking right now with Boeing's Tori Wills-Pedrati and Jim May, both engineers in the Starliner systems. You're also seeing some of the replays of Starliner's very successful very smooth landing this morning in New Mexico. Jim, you have the you worked. You've both, of course, been working throughout the last couple of days. When did you, Jim? When did you first breathe your sigh of relief as you watched it come down this morning?